If you are a freelancer, you've probably been stuck at home like the rest of us, working day in, day out, putting in the hours, making some money, but you're not getting any sort of relaxation or adventure in your life. You're probably doing the same things every single day. Weeks are blending together, months are blending together, and it might be getting a little bit old, but you're not alone. I'm in the same boat. Now, here's the thing. If your business is set up in a way that you can do all your work from home on a computer or laptop, then you are in the perfect position to take advantage of what they call the digital nomad lifestyle. This is basically just being able to work and travel. And I call it a workcation. That's what my wife and I call it. Taking a workation is a great way to have some adventure in your life, go see the things you've always wanted to see, go eat the food you've always wanted to eat, go experience the things you've always wanted to experience while not missing out on income. As self-employed people, it is very hard to take vacations because we don't have something called PTO, paid time off. So as self-employed people, the best way to travel the world is to do it while we're working from our laptops. So in this video, I want to give you a 5-step process where you can actually make this happen ASAP, and all for about $3,000 for an entire month of travel. That's flight, food, lodging, everything included. If that sounds good for you, let's do it. So before I dive into these steps, I gotta mention that everyone has different priorities for their money. You're watching the 6-Figure Creative YouTube channel right now. We also have a podcast, and we always talk about ways to make more money, ways to save time in your business, ways to get more clients, ways to do taxes. We talk about a bunch of different stuff, and it's always related to making more money in your business. The problem with that is people can get blinded by the pursuit of just earning more and more and more. It's this, they call it the rat race in some places. Some people just call it, some people call it greed. But the reality is, if you're earning money, money is simply a tool. And if you're not making use of that tool in a way that's intentional, then what's the point of earning more money? So at the 6-Figure Creative, we're trying to help people understand that using this tool in a way that matches your own personal goals is going to be very important. You've got to build out what this is, whether it's giving more, whether it's just taking more time off and working less, whether it's seeing the world and traveling and having adventures and experiences with the people that you love and learning new cultures and trying new things. If that's what you value, this video is more for you. But I just want to make sure that you are understanding that money is simply a tool. And this is one of the ways that you can actually use that tool to improve your own life. And not just your life. A lot of the places that I travel, they need tourism dollars in those countries to actually sustain themselves. For so many countries, due to COVID, places are struggling immensely right now. And so places that are dependent on tourism are hurt a lot more than places that are not so dependent on tourism. Now, I'm not here to really argue the good and evil parts of tourism, because there are definitely evil parts of tourism as well. But I just want to talk about employing a tool for your use to match your goals. And one of my values and my wife's values is actually going out and traveling and experiencing the world. But we can't necessarily do that as business owners. We still have to make money. Now I want to get into the 5 steps of actually making this work. So let's get into the first step in this process, and that is finding your actual budget. In this video, I gave the just arbitrary example of $3,000 a month for travel. And for some people, that's a lot. For some people, that's a little. For some people, that's impossible. For some people, that is more than possible. It depends on you and your needs and your desires and your level of bouginess that you want to travel in. So if you are a single person and you're young and you're willing to stay in hostels and eat cheap street food, you can travel for way less than $3,000 a month. If you're married, especially with kids, you're going to need way more than $3,000 a month for international travel. But I want to show you at least the categories of things that you need a budget for when you're traveling. The first is flights. This is obvious. If you're especially if you're going overseas, you have to get across the ocean in some way, shape, or form. Flights pretty much the only way, unless you want to take a cruise, which I have had a friend do. But I'm just going to budget in flights for most people. The second is hotels. This is an obvious expense. You're gone for a month at a time. You're going to need some place to stay. Now, it doesn't have to be an actual hotel. It could be an Airbnb or some sort of vacation rental, VRBO, but you have to stay somewhere. So lodging is an important part of factoring in your specific budget. The next thing is food. Now, you obviously have to eat. You're not going to survive this trip without food, so we have to budget for that. The next thing is transportation. Once you're actually in the city, how do you get around from place to place? And then the fifth thing is experiences. What are you going to actually do when you're there? Whether it's seeing sights or experiencing things or going to sporting events or whatever it is that you want to do for entertainment while you're in that country. So I've got a little example budget here for you to go over, and you can kind of copy this and alter it to your own needs. But this is one example is a $3,000 budget. This is really if you're a solo traveler. The next is a $5,000 budget. And this is if you're traveling with a significant other. Both of these are realistic, but I want to go through these line item by line item and then show you how this is actually possible. The first is flights. I budgeted $500 for a month trip. The second is hotels, $1,500 for the month. And that's it for the first 2 main expenses. The next 3 expenses are expenses that you would likely actually have whether or not you're traveling internationally. This is an important distinction because if you're already spending money at home, then it makes no difference where you are spending that money, whether you're at home or whether you're in another country. So when you're budgeting, you only need to account for what you're going to spend above and beyond your normal budget. This is an example for someone already spending $500 a month on food. That could be high for you or it could be low for some people, but I'm putting someone that's already spending $500 a month on food. So we're budgeting an additional $400. This is the only thing I'm actually factoring in this $3,000 budget, because if you've set aside $3,000 for this trip, this is the only thing that's going to be taken out of that $3,000 because you've already spending that $500 right there. So that means we have $900 to spend total on food for the trip. Next is transportation. I budgeted $250 for the month for transportation. That could be a bit overkill. It depends on what you're doing. We'll talk about that more in a second. Then I've also factored in an additional $50 for just things you might spend on gas in a given month in your home. And then the fifth thing is experiences. I've budgeted $350, which is just over $10 a day. It's a little low, but most people are spending at least $100 a month on some sort of entertainment, whether that's video games, whether that's Prime video rentals, or going to the movies, going to concerts. So whatever your normal budget is, add that to here, but I'm putting a total of $450 spent in the month, $350 that, which comes out of the actual $3,000 budget. Now, if you have $5,000, it looks a little different. Flights are the same at $3,000. Hotels are a little bit more. Food is higher as well, because this is kind of a two-person budget. Transportation is a little higher and experiences are also higher. This is also a fluid thing. Think about it this way. This is almost like if you're a video game nerd, this is almost like an RPG, your experience points. You have a set amount of experience points, 5,000 experience points. Depending on how you like to live your life, you can move these experience points around, but you have a limit. You can only put so much into your strength, so much into your agility, so much into your charisma. Think of it the same way. If you value hotels over food, you want to stay in really nice places, take some out of the food budget, add it to your hotel budget. If you don't really care about hotels, you're okay with staying in hostels and shared dorms, take a ton out of the hotel budget and put it into food or experiences, whatever you value. Now, if you've been looking at these numbers and thinking that's absolutely impossible, that's stupid, how did you get these numbers? I'm going to show you now how to actually make the rest of this work so these numbers can all come together. So now you've done step one, you've determined your actual budget. So the next step is actually determining where you want to go. And this is a very personal decision. This depends on what your goals are, what your desires are, the places you've been dreaming to go. But really the biggest limit to most people's travel is going to be budget. So I'll give you a couple ideas of where you can go if you have a higher budget and places you can go if you have a lower budget for your trip. But the higher budget places, the places that are more expensive to travel, is obviously United States, very expensive to travel there. Next is Iceland. I've been there. Very expensive place to go, especially if you like going on excursions and seeing some of the things with group tours and guided tours and that sort of stuff. The UK is pretty expensive. Anywhere in Western Europe or Northern Europe tends to be pretty expensive. And then places like Japan can be very, very expensive, depending on, again, how you travel. You can travel a lot of these places on sort of a budget method, but it's not as easy to do as some of the other places, which is the cheaper alternatives, which I'll talk about, which is Eastern Europe, very budget friendly. Southeast Asia, I was there beginning of 2020 and it was awesome and it's very cheap and you can live like a king over there for a relatively low budget. And Central and South America, pretty much all of those countries in those areas are relatively budget-friendly places to travel. Now, if you're still not sure, there's a tool that I recommend called budgetyourtrip.com. You can type in really any destination you want to go, and it'll tell you just a general guideline of what to expect while you're in that country. So let's just type in, for example, USA. The United States is, again, one of the most expensive places to travel, but this shows you the average cost per day is about $223. They even show you if you want to do like budget cheap, they'll give you prices for that, $83 a day. And they actually break it down if you go down here on how much on accommodations, on the low end, different types of hotels, what that would cost, a campground, hotels by the airport, how much to expect for food if you're on a budget trip. Or if you're someone that has a lot of money and you just want to travel the world and see all the things, then you can expect to spend as much as $633 a day. Actually, there's really no limit to how much you can spend when traveling, but this is a good site for that. One of my wife and I's favorite places to travel is Thailand. And that's because it is so budget friendly. When you go to that country, it's going to show their local currency, which is the Thai baht. So that's, don't let the sticker shock be a thing there. Just switch to the different currency. And it shows the average cost per day is $98, which is less than half of that of the USA. And honestly, you can expect to spend much less than that, depending on how you travel. My wife and I spent about that much. And that was on a trip where we were not in any way trying to be that budget conscious. We were just doing whatever we wanted to do. And it still came out to around $100 a day. If you're a budget traveler, it can be even better, $32 a day. Now, a big mistake that I see people making when they're deciding where they want to go is they want to go everywhere. They want to do all the things. They want to hit every single country in Europe, for example. And that's just not feasible. That's honestly miserable if that's the way you want to travel, because you tend to be spending all your days traveling and not actually enjoying those trips. My wife and I, we try to stay in a city for about a week if we can when you're traveling abroad, and sometimes even longer than that. But the minimum I would suggest staying is like 3 to 4 days in a city. And the reason is that every single time that you're traveling, meaning you have to check out of your hotel, get on a plane or a train, travel to your destination, get your bags over to the new hotel or the new Airbnb, check in, get settled in. By the time you've done that, you've wasted an entire day. So for every single city that you visit on your trip, that's about a day to a day and a half taken off of your actual trip as enjoyment. Once you've done this a number of times, you'll realize that this is not the only workation you're ever going to take. You can take more of these. And as you do more and more trips, you'll learn to enjoy, slow down, experience a little bit more, and not try to do everything every single time you're traveling. So that was it. Step 2 is deciding where you want to go. My wife and I, we're going to be flying into Madrid at the end of this month, and we're going to be in Europe for about a month, which is why I'm making this video right now. And we're actually going to go out to Eastern Europe because it's so budget friendly and there's so many beautiful things to see. The food can be great depending on where you're going. But we're also going to spend some time in Spain because we love that country so much. Now we're on to step 3, and that is booking your flights. This is really where you put the stake in the ground and says, I am actually going to do this trip once you've booked your flights. And that's because most airlines are non-refundable. So once you've booked this trip, you better be sure that you want to go. Otherwise, you're likely not going to get your money back if you back out at this point. Now, there are a few exceptions I'm not going to get into, but that's generally the way you need to treat this. Once you've booked the flight, you are set in stone that you're going on this trip. So make sure you've looked at all things on your calendar to make sure you can indeed go on this trip for the length of time that you've planned. So let's dive into a tool that I use to book my trips that's going to make this so much easier for you as you're trying to explore how you can get cheap tickets for your trip. Now we're on Google Flights, one of my favorite websites in the world. And it's because they make it so easy to find cheap flights. And the key to this is going right up here to the Explore tab. So put your starting city in wherever you live, and let's just see what sort of deals that you can find for your city. And then for where do you want to go, I like to keep this as broad as possible. So for my wife and I, when we were going to Europe, we're actually pretty open to going anywhere. So I actually just typed in Europe into this Explore tab. And I try to set it, if you're going to go for a month, the most they'll let you look at is 2 weeks. Anytime in the next 6 months, they're going to look through all the flights on the books right now and tell you the cheapest places to go in all of Europe in the next 6 months for a 2-week long trip. Now we're going for a month, so we're gonna have to make some adjustments, but this is the good first step for this. Now go to all filters and say flights only. That'll take away a lot of these cities that don't have direct flights to them, because some of these are showing you places you can fly to another city and then drive to, which is not really the way I'd recommend doing things. And now you can either start zooming in and looking around this map, or you can just scroll through this list of cities here and see what you have. $618 to London, $634 round trip to Paris, Rome is $612. There are trips to Madrid for $511, which is actually where my wife and I are flying into, is Madrid. Barcelona for $510, and so on and so forth. Now here is, again, where your budget's going to be an important part of deciding where you fly. Because if you looked at our mock budget here, you saw that flights are actually not the biggest thing on our budget. The biggest thing on our budget is our hotel budget. $1,500 here or $3,000 here. So even though Madrid seems to be the cheapest city to fly to, if you are trying to have the longest trip, maybe the best experience, get the best lodging you can for the budget that you have, you may want to start looking into just flying straight to Eastern Europe and seeing what your options are here, because you can fly to Budapest, which actually, as of the time I record this video, you can't actually get into Budapest, even with a vaccination, but you can get into Prague. You can get into Dubrovnik for $750. Bucharest for $624. These cities are beautiful, they're charming, they're amazing, and they're so much cheaper than even Madrid, Spain. So let's pretend, for this example, we want to go to Prague. It's $637. Can we get a better deal? So the next thing we're going to do is hit View Flights. And you'll see that the cheapest dates that they selected were Monday, November 22nd to December 8th. But what we want is a 30-day trip. Let's adjust this stuff. We've got 16 days is selected right here. So you just click the days up there, and we're going to increase this to 30 days. And now just sit and let this load. You'll see fuzzy numbers here. Give it a minute, and you'll actually start to see some numbers populate here. So what you're seeing is these green numbers show you what date you can leave for a 30-day trip, and it'd be that price. So if we left November 1st, it'd be $649 if we returned December 1st. So let's see what it looked like if we move these dates around and see maybe January, February of next year, what the prices might be. And you can see it's a similar price until we get into February, and then prices start to go up. Now, another important factor to come into mind whenever you're booking your trip is what is the weather like in the place that you're trying to go? Now, Prague, the place that I have in this selection here, is actually beautiful around Christmas, full of snow. They have Christmas celebrations everywhere. And so maybe you actually want to go to Prague around Christmas time. So if we go back to our selection here and go to December, we see that we can leave the 12th of December, come back, really any of these dates we can come back and have that price. So this is our return date price. I'm going to select January 12th. I'm going to hit done. And now that you see we have a few flights to choose from here for this price. Now you saw on our budget sheet, we have $500 budgeted for our travels, but we've actually spent a little bit more. So we have to account for that. So I'm going to actually take $650 is what I'm going to account for on flights here. And I'll take $150 off of our hotel budget. But because we made this trip, I think that's about right. We made this trip with a thought in mind of we're going to spend a little bit more on the flights, but save a little bit money on hotels. Now, what do you do if you don't have cheap flights in your area? Right now, flights are honestly cheaper than I've ever seen them for flights to Europe, especially from Nashville. Sometimes it can be over $1,000, sometimes $1,200 to $1,300 for a round trip flight from Nashville. So there's actually a good workaround for this if you're from a city where your flights are really expensive, and that is booking two separate legs. Here's what I mean. Go back to the Explore tab, put in your nearest major hub airport. That could be Chicago, that could be LAX, that could be New York. I'm just gonna put New York in here because that's what I've done. We did this for my honeymoon. I did this with the first time I went to Europe. I flew out of New York into Europe. And make sure you're on the same flexible dates. And now this is gonna load flights from New York City, and that's all their airports, JFK, whether it's EWR or LaGuardia, all the flights from that city. And you see in the next 2 weeks, or in the next 6 months, a 2-week trip from New York to Europe, these are the prices: $335 round trip to Madrid, $462 to Prague. So now, if you can get a flight from $462 from Prague, now you just have to get to New York round trip for less than $200 for the exact same price that I'm spending from Nashville on my trip. So for a lot of you, you're living in a city where you can't get to your final destination cheap, but you can get to a hub city relatively affordably. I've seen flights from Nashville to New York all year round for about $100 to $200 round trip. So it's easy to do it this way if you're going to New York, spend a couple days in New York, see the sights, do the things, and then fly from New York to your destination city. Just make sure you're not flying into the wrong airport if you're trying to do a same-day changeover. I like to have a little buffer time if I'm going to do that. So we've got our flights selected. We know which flights we want to do. That's Nashville to Prague for me. That's December 12th to January 12th, something like that. But now we want to get a lay of the land on hotels before we book our flights. Because remember, you book the flights first, but you got to make sure hotels are not astronomically expensive before you've settled on the flights that you are going to book. That brings up my next favorite site, and that is booking.com. I use this all the time for booking hotels. And we've got Prague selected. We're going to select our dates in here. I'm not going to do the entire month because generally I'm not going to be in the same city for that long. So let's just say the 13th through the 17th, or Christmas time, or whatever it is you're trying to actually do in Prague. They'll have the festivities there in mid-December, so you don't have to be in Prague on actual Christmas time. And we want to do a couple things important. Scroll down to review score. We're only wanting to see awesome reviewed hotels, so 9+, and we want to filter out hotels that are out of our budget. So if we have, what was our budget right now? If we have $1,350 left on our hotel budget, because we've added some to the flight budget and we've taken some out of our hotel budget, we now have about $45 a night, which is really low. Let's see what we can find for $45 a night in Budapest. And by the way, not Budapest, I meant Prague. Budapest is the city that I went in Eastern Europe. Prague is the city we're looking at now. You'll see that we do have some options here. The Royal Court, let's open that up. There's a couple hostel, there's honest apartments. Let's look at these two right now. This first one, Royal Court, if you look at the location, this is an important thing. Show on the map where it is, because this is going to reduce our transportation budget if it's in a city center, which it is. It is right in the middle of Prague, walkable to many important destinations. The next thing we're going to look at is the accommodations. What is the actual accommodation type? This is the studio apartment. You'll see that it's relatively clean looking. Photography is solid. Overall, I think it's a good deal. And I would book this. $135 for 4 nights. That is $33 a night for this option here. The second option is honest apartments. This is if you want something with a little bit more ability to do cooking in the hotel to save on food budget. And you'll see the same thing, show on map. You'll see this option is on the west side of the river. There is a bridge to cross, so you can get to the main city center relatively easily with a walk, maybe a subway, depending on their subway systems. And you also see it's actually by a train station, meaning if you want to take a train to another city, you're right by the train station, which means you save on a taxi getting to and from the train station. You can just walk there. So that's a plus side for this one. You'll see the photos all look nice, and the accommodations for a studio comfort wall bed. Let's see what that is. I don't love that. I don't like the Murphy bed look. Let's look down to the next accommodation. A studio comfort, which is just a queen bed for $243 for 4 nights. This looks much more likely something that I would want to get. You've got a stovetop, you can cook. You've got a little dining table, you've got more room. And that is $243, 243 divided by 4 nights. That is $60 a night, just a little over our budget. Now, if I were to choose, I likely would go with the first one, Royal Court, but you can splurge a little bit if you wanted to on this first leg of the trip, because you can always make up for it later, or take some of your other budget away from food or other things. So at this point, you've just reviewed the hotel options. You know that there is something available at the dates that you're arriving. So now you can go back and confidently book that flight. So you've accomplished step 3, which is booking your flights. Now you would immediately go back and book the hotel for that first stay, the first 4 or 5 nights. Check that off the list. That's step 4, which is book the hotel room for your arrival. And then step 5 is just wing it. From that point on, you don't have to have every single thing planned out for your trip. This is where so many people get things wrong. My wife and I, again, we're going to Europe next month. We'll be there for an entire month, but we only have the first 5 nights booked out in Madrid. When we land, we have a nice hotel booked out. It's about $125 a night, which is a little higher than the budget that we have set aside, which is $100 a night for our hotels. And honestly, I can actually splurge on that because I have so many credit card miles that I can spend on lodging. We actually paid for our entire flights over, for both of our flights over, with credit card points, which I'm not going to really get into this because it's beyond the scope of this conversation for this video. But just to say, we're going over there for a month. We only have our first 5 nights booked out. This is what we did on our last trip to Thailand. It's what we did on our honeymoon before that in 2019. And we'd like to do it this way for a number of reasons. The first reason is that if things change, we're not stuck in this rigid schedule that is ruining our trip for us. This is especially important in today's times where COVID regulations are changing by the day with the Delta variant and so many other things. And who knows by the time you're watching this, what sort of variant is out there, but things are changing constantly. So if we have more than 5 nights booked out, it puts us in jeopardy of the entire trip being ruined by a cascading effect of flights being delayed or regulations changing in a certain country. And so we don't want to have every single step planned out. So we wing our trips. It doesn't mean we go unprepared, however. We do a lot of research up front. We look at YouTube videos for some guidance. We look on online blog articles. We look to travel shows. We look to just any sort of resource we can find, personal recommendations from friends on the things that we would love to do. We make a list for every single city of things that we would like to see potentially, but that doesn't mean we have to see every single one of them. So as we get to a city and maybe 2 to 3 days before we leave, sometimes 4 days before we leave, I start looking at what is our next leg of the trip going to be. And that sounds terrifying until you realize that in Europe, once you're over there, travel is extremely cheap within the city, whether it's trains, whether it's planes, whether you're renting a car, it's not that expensive. You can get a flight from one city to another one way for about $10 to $25 all the time, $50 at most for a one-way trip. Train tickets are even cheaper, $8 to $25 to $30 for a train ticket from one city to another. So you can get around really cheap while you're over there. And hotels tend to be, especially right now, are not booked up. Even 3 or 4 days out, you can tend to find a really good hotel for cheap. Now, if you're traveling peak season, that's going to vary, but just know that the pros massively outweigh the cons of trying to be rigid with your travel. So now you just have a list of things that you would like to see, but based on your budget, where it's at, based on your energy levels, where your energy is, you can decide which things you actually want to tackle on that list as you're going through your daily rhythms of life. Now, what I really want to know is, where are you going to be traveling within the next year or so? When things open back up, when travel becomes easier, when you gain the confidence to do this a little bit more, where do you want to actually go? And also the secondary question I want you to answer is, what questions do you have for me as someone? I've been around the world. I've been on multiple trips, workations. I've been a digital nomad. I've worked the life from my laptop and I've done all these things. What do you actually want to know more about when it comes to this sort of subject? Because I would love to create more content around this. We're actually going to create more content around this for the YouTube channel on our trip next month. And I want to make sure you're around for the ride on that. Now, on future videos, I want to actually talk about what it looks like to travel and work and try to get things done and be productive and stuff like that. So if you are new to this channel, make sure you actually subscribe to the channel. That's the only time I'm going to say that. You can lightly tap the like button, just gingerly tap it. Be nice to it and follow along for my wife and I's journey on our month-long trip. And we're going to have some additional content for the 6-Figure Creative on how we're doing this thing of traveling abroad in the shoes of actually people doing this and still being productive and getting work done while we're doing it. So hopefully this video is helpful for you. So stay around and I can't wait for you to see what we have in store.